That's Chick-fil-A, you can't have it your way.
Exactly.
That's right.
Scott, I'll learn this.
For Chick-fil-A?
Okay, you're now live.
That's a challenge.
Yeah, I couldn't say that.
I don't know. You might want to.
Right,
I think this morning now.
we are now live.
Right.
So I'd like to thank you for being here this morning. I'm Jackie Warner, Mayor of Hope Mills, and this is the first meeting of our Golf View Driveway Study Committee, and that's why we're all here today. We are live because of the number of people that requested to attend, and because of Governor Cooper's regulations, and with COVID right now the way it is, small meetings like this, you see what we have to do in order for us to interact. We have to have our guards up and our masks. So I just let you understand that's the reason why we are live at this time. No interaction with the public other than they can see the discussion that takes place. I'm going to start at the end where Mr. Gardner is. I ask you to introduce yourself. This is a roll call, so people will know who's here. Introduce yourself and who you represent. Okay?
My name is Charlie Gardner. I represent my parents, Charles and Janet Gardner. They are the mineral rights holders for the subject properties off of Golfview, not the town property, but owned by GMR Capital and J&M of NC.
My name is Vijay George, and I'm a hot owner of the J&M property.
I'm Scott Brown, civil engineer with 4D Site Solutions.
Glenn Jernigan Jr., owner of the opposite piece of property, Mr. B.
Eddie Minor, I represent the citizenry of the adjoining community to the property.
Richie Hines, I'm district engineer with DOT.
Rodney Sherrill, and partner to GMR Capital.
Mark Knight, partner to GMR. Chance McLaughlin, Planning and Economic Development Director of Town of Hope Mills.
And I'm Melissa Adams, Town Manager for the Town of Hope Mills.
Lamarco Morrison, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Bruce Clark, Deputy Director of Public Works, Hope Mills.
Don Cisco, Hope Mills Public Works.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. McLaughlin to give us some information in reference to how we got here today and what this meeting and committee is all about.
Thank you. And as the mayor, I want to say, why are we basically here today? This is the Golfview Driveway Study Committee tied to the Park for Development Project. Now, in terms of background and key aspects, the Part 4 initial design contemplated access to the site through an extension of Crampton Road for the development of 114 duplex multifamily units. Shortly after the case was filed, staff was contacted by members of the Golfacres and surrounding neighborhoods about issues tied to the increased traffic through the community. The developer was engaged by staff to explore the possibility of relocating the access to Golfview Road. One of the main issues the developer faces with a proposed driveway off of Golfview Road is that there's very limited access, as there's only 49 roughly feet of frontage for the entire property. As it relates to the makeup of properties along this portion of Golfview, there are three main entities that own adjacent parcels of land: the Part 4 Development Group, J&M of NC Incorporated, which is Mr. George and his team, and the Town of Hope Mills, with Mr. George's property providing the current access to this area. As such, all three parties have a collective interest in a driveway permit at this location. The Town of Hope Mills currently has a temporary driveway near Fairway Drive, but would like a second entrance off of Golfview, as we're in the process of designing our property as well. The main goal of this committee is to design a driveway entrance that directly addresses the concerns of the community while accommodating the three interested parties' ability to develop their respective parcels of land. The designed driveway will more than likely need to consist of 3 spurs that provide cross access to all three parts of property. This is just a site plan of the current design that shows the access on Crampton, but I want you to focus on the Golfview piece, and that's what I was talking about earlier, where it's only about 49 feet of frontage. So in order to get a driveway permit from the DOT road, you're gonna have to have some type of a conversation with the adjacent property owners. This is a view that kind of gives you an idea of the makeup of all three parcels. What you see in yellow is the parcel for the Park for development. What you see in red is the JNM of NC piece, it's Mr. George's piece, and then our piece is outlined in blue. This is also a view that kind of gives you a blow up. What you see in the red arrow is the current access. What you also see Suchak to the far right of the screen. You see Golfview and Fairway Drive, which is the proximity of our current temporary driveway access. Now, before we open it up for discussion, I wanted to at least make sure everyone's aware of the approval process. Once we're successful with this current design, the next step would be to submit that revised site plan to the county. What that does is it allows our Board of Commissioners to put a case 20-087 back on the next available agenda. But we will also need to execute step 2, which would be an MOU or a memorandum of understanding that outlines the terms and conditions of this agreement / partnership, and that must be approved by the Board of Commissioners. With that said, I'd just like to open up the floor for this discussion, but just to let everyone know, the main goal of this, Scott Brown is the engineer. We would like to have a conversation that provides him with the information that he needs to be able to come up with a design that would ultimately meet DOT's requirements. Some of the questions that I have just in general that we probably need to think about would be, if we're talking about this section of Golfview, in order to facilitate probably the deceleration lane that's going to be required on Golfview, this question is probably Mr. Hanson DOT. What is that minimum length that we need to accommodate for, which is probably going to contemplate a right-of-way dedication from Mr. George and from us, depending on what that length would be. But what would Scott need to know in terms of that minimum length that we probably have to accommodate for?
For a posted speed limit of 35 miles an hour, you're probably looking, Scott, you're familiar with the design manual and the charts we have. We're probably looking at somewhere between, 200 and 300 feet of a taper, and then an appropriate full storage based on the use. So, just for purposes of this discussion, you might want to say probably no more than 400 feet in each direction would accommodate your tapers and your storage that would be necessary for a driveway.
Center turn 2 weeks.
We also had a conversation, and this is related to what I spoke to before about the three-way cross access. So as you come off of this deceleration lane, we're talking about some kind of small disc-shaped roundabout. But what would be that distance from that entrance down that we need to accommodate for at least a minimum distance?
I'd say no closer than 100 feet. We would have to take a look at that with our traffic services unit, but I can imagine we'd want to be closer than 100 feet to the roadway, to Golfview.
Now, also, we have, if you're aware of this, we have our temporary driveway in the fairway area. Is there a minimum distance we need to maintain from that entrance that we want to preserve from this new entrance that we're trying to actually put in place?
Chancellor, that kind of varies a little bit. It will really depend on the existing driveways on Golfview as well as the proposed driveways associated with this development. I'd hate to throw a minimum out there because you could probably find instances where we have, we're less than the minimum that I would throw out. So it just depends. I know it's not a satisfactory answer.
No, but this is
That's
really
how it
about
is.
the conversation we're having,
Right.
because I'm asking these questions really just to put on the record. These are the things we're trying to balance out while we actually come up with this design. Also, there are rumors about a future widening of Golfview from Suchak back to 295. I know that's well in advance of now, but is there a minimum right of way for the entire stretch of Golfview that we need to maintain? I think Don probably factored that in with the new temporary parking lot we put into play.
Right.
But that's something we probably need to be aware of.
Yeah, and to the best of my knowledge, the project's not funded. I think it's probably been submitted by FAMPO for DOT and others to consider to develop into a project. It's not funded, so it could be years down the road. And the right-of-way width will of course vary on what kind of typical section. If we went with a 4-lane divided roadway section, that of course is gonna, require some additional right-of-way to be obtained.
Okay, and I'd like to open the floor to any questions you guys have or any concerns. Scott, or do you have some ideas that you're kind of contemplating?
I guess, first of all, probably need to consider it's gonna be a conversation between Mr. George and Lynn. I know Mr. George had expressed a little bit of interest in potentially doing something with this piece of property as well. So I guess the first thing we need to nail down is the actual location. Are we considering trying to get the driveway to fit on the long stem that currently G&M Capital owns for R4 Village and just pick up whatever additional right of way is needed for the turn lanes? Or we want them more centrally located? I don't know what the plans are for this, a lot of this area here. If we can get to put a road right through the middle of it or put a road over here and tie back in, because we can certainly put a long stem all the way down and tie back into R4 Village, and off of that stem, you could put a right turn somewhere 100 foot down that would serve Mr. George, and the stem could be extended on through and serve Oak Mills and just have one stem road off of it. I'm not sure what the future plan is as far as, I mean, if Mr. George wants to develop his property, it may be better to pick the whole road up, slide it over, so it's more closer towards the line for the shared line between Oak Mills and Mr. George. That would pull a driveway closer back towards temporary driveway. It's going to decrease that distance. But the geometry is the same, whether you just physically, where you located that along Golfview Road. It's going to take you, in order to build a Hope Mill Street and get sidewalks on both sides of Hope Mill standards, it's almost that full 50 foot is what we need in order to physically get the infrastructure in the ground, not counting the grading outside of it. So I guess it's a conversation as to what Mr. George sees happening with his land, because for G&M, the distance is basically the same. We're coming off, we got their property don't open up until we get down to the bottom. So whether we slide it up and down Golfview don't make a whole lot of difference, except for what the final dollar amount is. The roadway length is not going to vary a whole lot. The tapers are going to be the same requirements. Whether
Yes, I can say the
here or
tables now,
there,
all
that's the
FCC
same.
review
You
slide.
just sliding the pieces of the puzzle around.
Would you put the other picture up that shows all three properties? I think that would help so they can see how the properties are.
And what Scott was saying, whether you do that with tapers, if you're doing it with a roundabout,
Yeah.
the key is to make sure all three parties have future access to their respective parcels for the development. Our timeline is probably the longest in terms of yours is the shortest. And I guess
a corner, a laser pointer or something. Because you could almost put it in between the shared line between the town of Hope Mills and Mr. George, and it could be extended straight on into the G&M, the yellow property, and then you could come directly off left and get to Mr. George's property, right to get to Hope Mills. But it is going to put you closer toward the other existing driveway. But like I said, where it's physically located, that makes no difference whatsoever to us. We just need an agreement in place with whoever's planning on, it would be more Mr. George's property to put it on, off of Golfview Road, slide it down that common line, it'd be more a split between town and Hope Mills and Mr. George.
and one of the reasons why I definitely needed Don and Lamar over here as well, because they would be able to better articulate how this needs to happen, so it incorporates with the design that we're doing with Golf.
With the turning lane itself, we know that there's going to take a fair chunk of the town's property for the turning. We accept, well, we know that if that's what the direction we're given, that's going to happen. And like Scott says, the big thing for location is when he says the geometry is the same, means the shape of whatever it is isn't going to change no matter where it's at. The question's going to be so that it is more feasible and viable for all three partners in this is exactly where does the driveway come into here to, whether it be a roundabout or something like that to spur off of. If it comes further down here, it takes a little bit less off the town and a little bit more off of Mr. George's, and then it's easier access it here, or if we put it down in here, it's more off the town. As far as our future plans, we looked at having a roadway along this property line so that it comes down around for the future park area within the Gulfview area. So if we don't have a whole bunch in this corner, we have the ability to spur off and come around in here and accommodate the turning lane right there.
You're looking at anywhere, depending on how, if a Gulfview road, it looks like it's pretty well centered based on the aerial photograph, anywhere from 10 to 15 foot of additional right of way for the length of the right turn lane. You should be able to accommodate the left turn lane in existing 60 foot right of way. But the dedication is going to be needed on the right turn. And what I would suggest, just from sitting right here looking at it, is that where we take and almost take a sharp 90-degree turn and go back out to Crandon, is we eliminate that 90-degree turn, hold that same geometry, shoot that road straight up into Gulfview Road. That will get, and then.
So you're looking at having the access point right here.
Yeah, a little bit further over, maybe another 60 foot over or so. But if y'all, like I said, it would either go there, in my opinion, or down the shared property line between Hope Mills and Mr. George, if you're going to put a future road in that runs down that property line.
So the entranceway would either be approximately here, or
that's what I would suggest, yes. And then no matter if you put it straight in, then that will serve par 4 going straight inside, and we could potentially, take that 50 foot that par 4 already has, negotiate something out with Mr. George so that we don't have a lot of dead roads coming in there. We can back townhomes, continue that all the way up on that side and give Mr. George room to develop on this side, or we work out a deal that we take a strip, that whole strip all the way up and work out who's responsible for the turn lane. As far as some kind of a shared cost, but that would get it off of Crampton, and then we could have a access for Mr. George as well as Hope Mills and a straight shot.
I think what I'm hearing you saying is if we put the entrance here, then that way we'll have essentially a service road into the Hope Mills property, be able to spur off of it to Mr. George's, and then have essentially almost a straight into the park proposed development.
We would line the side between the existing subdivision and the west side of the new service road with townhomes. We just basically continue straight on up that way because the roads are expensive to build. And unless you can you need to be able to get some kind of return out of it. And we can get a return out of it by putting some additional units, filling it all the way back up to Gulfview Road.
And that's all tied to the redesign of things.
Right.
So that's why I said at the end,
But they need
a lot
some
of
land
stuff we have to do.
needed for that whole thing to take place.
That's what I'm saying, at the end of this, whatever we do, the amended site plan must be resubmitted. And also, it's probably part of the MOU, it's probably gonna have to have some language tied to easements and cross access and things of that nature, just so everyone has the ability to get to that respective pieces of property.
A couple of things I want to point out if I can. Now, we, DOT, we typically encourage cross-access, so the stub that exists, is it Cranford? Crampton, that's something we want to see utilized. In other words, and we're all for minimizing access on our roadways. So if there's an existing stub, we typically prefer it be utilized. However, if in this case we can encourage joint driveway use amongst the three properties, then we'd be willing to back off of our typical requirement to require stub and allow an access out off the Gulfview. So I wanted to bring that up, just to be on the record with that. And then secondly, our driveway manual, I think, says 100 feet is a minimum stem length. Depending on what all is proposed here, if there's going to be a roundabout, we may want it 200 feet. We may want it 250 feet in it. 100 feet is what the design manual says, but it'll depend on the circumstance. I just wanted to get that out there as well, that it may be a couple hundred feet off of Gulfview that we'd be comfortable.
Just so everybody can see what Mr. Hines is talking about, he's talking about that stub out, he's talking about access right here.
Which I think is what everybody in the public world and what we're showing.
And Mr. Hines is speaking to the regulations. Our subdivision ordinance promotes extension of stuff as well, but addressing the concerns that were raised by the community, that's ultimately why we're here. So I think what I'm hearing him say, because we're doing this almost as a three-way deal with cross access, that's enough to make it at least feasible for them to take the Gulfview approach.
And I think we're also looking at that we're doing this for visionary too, in that we know all three of these properties are going to be developed. And why not do something on the front end that will make it cost effective? Because if you're looking at, we know we want access to the park that we've developed. We've got an extensive plan for that acreage. And we know that Mr. Bijou is wanting to plan to do something with his. Knowing that and knowing the way the entrances are now cut, I think that's the town's interest, is making this so that long-term, it'll be cost-effective for us too. Because we know we want access, we know we want a driveway, and we know we don't want to have to duplicate work in the future. We don't want to have to put in additional sidewalks or additional driveways. If we can get it all accomplished at once, long-term, it's going to help us too.
Very key point too.
Well, I think it's looking aesthetically better for the community. Just trying to get precise in regards to with DOT.
Yes, yes.
In regards to the cost and that sort of thing. We have no problem. I think it'd be better for all three parties. So let me get you straight. So the Crampton we would not use at all because we're going to go with the Gulfview.
I think that's what's.
So it's going to remain a fence and that sort of thing. So we're not. It's just going to remain a stub out right there with the fence still on side of it. Is that correct?
DOT wouldn't have a dog in that fight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but basically, just to make sure everyone's aware, the main goal is to relocate that entrance off of Crampton to Gulfview. Whether it remains a stub out or whatever we do with it, as I guess it's on the town. But the main.
I think Mr. Mayor would like to speak.
Well,
Yeah,
Thank
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yes, the only thing I would like to say is representing the community. I've talked to a lot of people. There's not anybody really objecting to the development of this project. The town, we won't grow. But I was glad to hear you say in reference to the stub coming off where Crampton is. I cannot see any feasibility at all with the integrity of that old neighborhood. It's been very minimum expense to the town, police department, that kind of thing. That community is old, established. We have handicapped citizens in there. We have school children walking. We have crosswalks up there. I think it would put a better taste in everybody's mouth if the parties involved, the developers, DOT, if everybody can come together, work out an agreeable solution, and stay away from opening that stub. Because in my opinion, and I'm just stating in my opinion, actually, gentlemen, that stub, had it been did some time ago, it wouldn't even be in a discussion now, because I think, and I was on the board when we closed River Street, that stub, the extension of Crampton, should have been closed. The commissioner should have had a resolution and closed the street. You wouldn't even have to be discussing and worrying about right now. But the citizens of the community, we'd be very appreciative and glad to see you located in our town, but do not destroy the integrity of that community by opening that Crampton stub up.
And I think what you said is very key, because out of a lot of the comments that I've received, it's one thing that I feel is consistent. Nobody is opposed to the development, it's just the access. So I think if we can pull this off by finding a solution that all three parties are okay with off of Golfview, I think that directly addresses the concerns from the community.
You want to some common driveway.
Now, do you guys think that this may accelerate your interest in the development of your piece?
That's why we want to stop.
Don, what's the lot count for a second access? I just had this conversation a while back with fire marshal. I just can't remember what that lot count is.
30.
The unit count.
30.
I'm pretty sure it's 30.
It's 30. It's 30 lots.
And without, well, 31 plus is a sprinkled system
For each unit.
for the units, yes.
So if we did this route, could we allow for Crampton to have the emergency access with a Knox box on it for emergency vehicles? Because we're over 30 units. And we're not interested in sprinkling every unit out there. That's what we're building them as a townhome for, so we need to get, when we get into the apartment rules. And I know it came up on Upchurch Lake about the second access. And if we're looking at doing this, Crampton's right there, we wouldn't keep it as a primary, it would be gated off, but it would still serve fire marshals as being able to have a Knox box on it and have it gated.
That would be something that we'd have to get the fire departments.
Yeah, that is a fire code issue, but that sounds like what you're saying is, are you asking not to have Crampton open to general public?
Correct.
But just for emergency access only?
Right, to serve as the second access for the development, because right now we've only got one in off of Crampton. And I just thought about that a second ago. But if we close Crampton out, then we'd have to look at it with fire marshal to see what all of the alternatives would be. And I know we've done that, something like that in the past, where we took a sub or an access and made emergency access only. It's not open to the general public, but it does satisfy the requirement for the second access.
No, what if you open a new driveway from the court, can we keep the Crampton access as it is? It's not, nobody's going to go, not that many people will go through that road.
You saying keeping it stubbed out, but don't open it?
Yeah, no, it's
No,
only
open
it's
it.
open.
I think that's ultimately the crux of the
But
issue.
only thing is, that is not the main. We had a main dedicated entrance from Golfview. Then that one will be open and that's a secondary. Even if somebody want to come out, it's hard to come out through the Golfview then coming straight. People are likely to use the new drive from Golfview.
More than like, just speaking on the pulse of what I'm hearing from the community, I'm not sure if that's gonna be pretty popular. Based on the overwhelming comments that I'm hearing from the community, they don't want access to Crampton at all.
Right now, there's only one access from Crampton. That's what, instead of that, you will have the main access from Golfview.
Technically, that's really what our goal is, to have one primary access off Golfview. I think what Scott is saying, I get what he's talking about, because he's asking for something that allows him not to have to hit that 30 first unit to be sprinkled for the remaining 114. But I don't know if that's, I have to check with the fire department to make sure that meets their intent, but I also have to make sure we hear from the community to see if that's going to still be an issue. In our world, having Golfview as a main entrance and Crampton as a secondary entrance, it works from an engineering standpoint, but I don't know if that adequately tamps down the concerns from the neighborhood in terms of people who still have the ability to go through that neighborhood to get access to the property. So that's something we have to work through. I can check to see if there's some caveat in the fire code that we could actually allow that just for emergency vehicles, and I guess to make sure that that's still okay with the community, but that's something we can look into.
Got a question. If all the interest, the main point's gonna be off Golfview, and whole thing is to extend that to 4 lanes, correct? With a turnaround. Okay, long term.
Yeah.
Just a question with the high traffic flow, is there gonna be a stop like that for in and out? That,
For the required for the Golfview entrance we're doing,
well, I mean,
because
if that's gonna be the only entrance, you only have a turn lane with that amount of units and people and cars coming in and out.
Richie, what is the threshold that would require a traffic study on Golfview?
Traffic study?
Yeah, are we hitting that with 114 units?
No, sir. You would probably need to meet our requirements, probably about 3,000 trips a day. And you would hit 3,000 trips a day,
To the development,
to the development, that's
Okay.
right. We would be looking for a TA of some sort.
we're not hitting that.
No, I don't think so. That would be the equivalent of maybe 300 single-family units. So you're not terribly far off, depending on, what else may be planned.
Now, Don, wasn't there a conversation about us possibly having to put in a light at the
Yes.
fairway entrance?
In future development, we're looking at having an access point here across from Fairway. And if that were to happen, right now, the leaning is that you would have to have a stop. That would have to be signalized.
You'll want a future access for the park, I mean, for the town property.
Yes,
Yes.
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 Because see, technically, the town needs 2 accesses. One that we have in the area for the temporary one, that one will become permanent. And then our second will be the one that we actually facilitate through this partnership. So I think to answer the question, if there is a light that is probably going to be required, it's probably going to be required at the fairway piece. I don't see them requiring a fairway piece light and another light here.
Right, and when it comes to a traffic signal, there are federal warrants that have to be met. And they're a little harder to meet than you might think. I know a lot of folks think, well, just put a light down there and that'll take care of traffic. But there are actual numbers that have to back up requiring the traffic signal, and it's a little more difficult than you might think. So you may find that the park may not generate enough traffic and meet some of the other criteria for a signal.
Then I think too, and with the roundabout that's proposed here, in my mentality, the roundabouts are being pushed because it helps continue traffic moving through.
It does.
So if DOT is removing a light here to put in a roundabout, I'm just guessing, but I'm very serious about you want to install a set of lights further down Golfview as new. I know we probably have one in the fairway, but I'm pretty sure y'all trying to minimize
Right.
on that aspect of it. Anybody else?
With this proposal, on the Golfview side, what is the requirement as far as maybe Scott needs to address this, the sidewalk? What kind of requirement are we gonna have on Golfview for the sidewalk?
Those sidewalks are 5 feet wide. And basically, whatever assemblage of land that is required, that sidewalk is required from one edge of the property to the other. So, we're not just across the frontage of that development. So we're not talking about 300 linear feet of sidewalks. We're just saying whatever that entrance would be, the sidewalk would have to run the length of that frontage off of Golfview. But it's 5-foot sidewalks off of Golfview as DOT, and it's 4-foot sidewalks off the internal drive that you put in to the park for development.
Okay, timeline for all this to take place and everybody, because we've got money invested. in
Yes,
this sort of
yes.
thing. I know it's the future for a lot of this stuff regarding, Golfview and all that. What is the timeline to come to a resolution after Scott draws something we all agree on, DOT approves it?
I think that's really up to us. There isn't, because our future goes a long term.
Yeah, that's what I'm, but-
So we're not doing this to make your development time in with our timeline. So I think as soon as we find out the design that we all agree with, our board has the ability to put it back on the agenda.
So the question we got, so if we move on and we only have access to right here and we don't go to Crampton, or we decide not to, we've got to kind of make appropriations to get started, or which way we're coming in, which we agreed on. The Crampton's gonna be the entrance until we all come, until it finalizes. That's what I'm trying
I
to.
think design wise, it's really as quickly as Scott comes up with the design. I think the real question is how long will it take to get the driveway across the DOT?
Don,
I want to interrupt you for a second. We're brainstorming, so don't kill the messenger, man.
Sure.
For a second access, and like I said, this is just a brainstorm here. What would be the possibility, and is palatable for everybody, to, when we develop our property, one of the plans that we have is to have, like I said, access off the fairway, and it's essentially going to come around the perimeter of the golf course. So if we actually stub out so that we can have another roadway along here that comes off of ours perimeter road coming back into the
That's your
property.
secondary entrance.
And then provide a secondary entrance for these properties back here.
We prefer not to build more than we have to. If you can get Brad on board with it, we're good to go.
Well, yeah, if we, if that's as a future development, typically that's what he's done. And.
But it sounds like what you're saying is you're using fairway as the secondary
We're using
entrance,
our
tying
roadway as a
it in.
secondary entrance here.
So that gives you your secondary entrance without opening Crampton, but it solves the issue of having to sprinkle the building.
As long as Brad's on board, we're good to go.
It would also, for the development of Mr. Bijou's property, it would give him that second entrance too, because he could stub off back there. And
That's a really good
another point, because if you look at one of our plans where we go back to the back where there's the access to the creek and everything back there, I can see multiple ways that it could work, they could work together.
So anyhow, it's a thought.
Yeah, good thought. I won't kill the messenger.
But I think but back to what Mr. Glenn was saying, once we get a design, I think we submit it, you get it into Richie. Light on it, try to get, but it's really, that's the timeline we don't have control over. But once that's in place, now you don't have to have the approval from DOT to get the approval from the board. You just have to have the approval from DOT before you get your building permit to start construction. So we can have a design done and go ahead and get it approved by the board, but you're basically submitting the DOT. That's what most projects do anyway. While you're getting board approval, you're having conversations with your external agencies like PwC and DOT so that you have your driveway permit application submitted, so that basically you're timing it so that it cuts down on your time to get a building permit, because you're not waiting until the official submission of your building permit to us to start your submission of your driveway permit to DOT. So that's what I think we can do to cut that timeline in. If you recall, the brief conversation we had, our main goal is not to delay this project to the point where it becomes an issue for you. So that's why we have to make sure all parties that are involved, nobody has something that kind of negatively impacts your interest.
Are all parties equal?
There's no such thing.
Elaborate.
I know all parties financially equal in this partnership.
I think that's more than likely a board decision. But I do think the whole goal of this is to develop some type of cost share so that if you're going on Golfview, you're not doing the entire development alone. We're not doing our second driveway entrance on our own, and Mr. George as well. So there is interest for all three parties in some kind of capacity from a financial standpoint. But I don't want to speak for the board. That is actually what we're saying.
And I think as far as representing the board, I think that's why we're here at the table, is to see what can we do, because we all have an interest in having that, an entrance there. And, so, we have to see what it's gonna look like, and then see what the cost factors are gonna be. I think that's the unknown, so you can't obligate till you see what's actually there.
I guess what, we go ahead, I didn't really.
You're right.
What I was saying too was that there's cost involved in doing what we're talking about doing right now. If the deal goes down south, I've got to get out there and I've got to do surveying, and I've got to spend some time drawing this thing up and getting everything put together. So Is that on Glenn and them to bear? Is that on me to bear? I mean, who's gonna, there's some upfront costs, forget the construction costs. There's upfront
Preliminary
costs.
cost, yeah, preliminary cost.
Yeah, is that for me to eat, Glenn to eat?
Everybody know?
Valid question. And that's pretty much what we have to figure out when it gets to the MOU, because the memorandum of understanding does outline.
Right, but see, when he makes a great point, when he draws it up, that's gonna be cost on his time, he's gotta build it sometime.
We understand all of that, but the caveat to that is that we cannot, nobody in this room can make that commitment for the town right now. So the more we can present a palatable plan for all parties involved, the better chance we have of being fully successful. And that includes equitable distribution.
Right, but I guess if we go forward and we do the plan, everybody's holding hands, we're all together, and then all of a sudden it's $900,000 hypothetically, and you guys, the board, say, no, it's on me, Mr. George. And, oh, by the way, engineering costs from y'all have to split, or it's on you, Glenn.
All I can tell you is that we're standing here in good faith.
Well, we are too.
You know, so.
We are too. We're sitting here in good faith.
But we all are aware of the issues that need to be factored into it. And that's something that we had conversations about it as well, in terms of just making sure everyone's aware of everyone's risk and everyone's skin in the game.
Yes. One thing, and this is just a comment I've heard in the discussion, a couple of people have sort of come back and touched on the Crampton stub. And one thing I like for the developer, everybody concerned to consider, and this is from the citizen's point of view, looking at the project and you're thinking, okay, access with the Crampton. You're thinking, if you look at it, Crampton runs straight to Rockfish Road. That street where it comes through, runs to Rockfish. All right, so you've got a traffic problem bad on Golfview. So if you open where everything else failed, and you would continue to push to open Crampton, the problem that's going to exist, and I would like for you to just think about it. You're not just opening it up to traffic coming out of the project going straight up Crampton to get back onto Rockfish to go east or west, north or south, however you want to say it. You've got all the streets in that neighborhood and the traffic, and I know one project that was developed up the road here, and that access was granted on one. And what happens, the traffic comes out of there, goes entirely into all the other streets that run back in that neighborhood, because they can come out of where the project is, turn right, and they're back in off of Floyd, you're down into Brightmoor, and they take a cut through to come back over here to come out by Mulder, Johnson, all that in there. It's a short way to get back to there and try to avoid traffic up there. So this is one of the reasons, many reasons, that the community is adamantly opposed to opening that Crampton.
I think what the idea Don came up with, where our roadway entrance off of Fairway circles around the site to provide that secondary entrance into this development, handles two issues. It addresses basically taking the focus away from Crampton, but it also, because that sprinkling issue, that's a financial thing that can add significant cost to a development. But I think that handles two birds. It eliminates that issue of having to sprinkle every building beyond 30, and it does adequately, at least from what I can see, we can pull this off, takes the focus completely off of Crampton. At least that's what I'm thinking of here. Anybody else got any concerns? Now, what I'd like to do, basically, Scott and I will, and Richie and Don and I will probably take some of this information, maybe come up with some concepts, vet those, and then maybe we call another meeting. How quickly could you come up with some ideas that we're talking
Couple of weeks, or so.
Okay. And I say we call another meeting to present those ideas. And ultimately, I wanted this meeting to be an information gathering session, so you get the engineering-based requirements to go ahead and come up with a concept. You'll probably have to sit down with Marco and Don and I to make sure that this new idea addresses everything we want. But the quicker we can get that done, the quicker we can call another meeting, present that to each other, and then go ahead and get it back on the agenda from our board to consider the approval of the project. And that, like I said, I'll help you time that with DOT. So at whatever point we feel like we have our design locked down, that's when you start engaging DOT so that you can get their eyes on it. So that during the process of getting the approval of the site plan through the board and subdivision, it's already in their shop waiting. That's typically what we do for all development projects, and that does shave down the permitting time. But I do think we have control on getting this through if we can come up with this design without major delays to your project, because that's your bottom dollar.
You're not talking about our.
This is.
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention, as far as speaking for the town, is that I don't know any other developments that can develop and have the amenities that your two developments will have when our town park is done. You need to look at the proposal of what our park is going to look like. And if somewhere along the way we can come up with a lot of money, it's, we're projecting 10 years. We're hoping sooner than that. But if you look at what's planned for there, just based on the plans that we currently have, I can't imagine not wanting to live that close because of being able to walk right out your door for canoeing, kayaking, possibly a gym facility, some type of ball fields, practice fields, walking trails. I mean, you're going to have it all, and I think that's the key here is that we've got the plan, and we just, right now waiting for the funding for the plan. I guess Mr. Cisco can speak to the amenities that will be available once this park is done.
Now, one thing that new idea with the cross access does, because it's going to require 4-foot sidewalks throughout, if I'm living in Part 4, I can literally walk out my door and walk down the sidewalk directly to this park.
Chancellor, I'm gonna let.
I want to address Scott's concern about the cost.
The cost.
We are going to, Scott, if you can give us a wag in the next couple of days on what you think the engineer, the front cost for the engineering is.
Hey, you put your foot in your mouth.
Let me change that. If you can give me a swag, the engineering cost is going to be, we'll bring it to the board on our next board meeting so that we can get at least an okay for the.
Up to, we can
For the upfront engineering
have them
costs, so that.
vote on up to a certain amount or,
We can keep this moving forward.
yeah.
Because like I said, with Don and I always say, we want to make sure everyone's interest in this is still maintained. We want everybody to be able to walk away from this feeling like they got what they need.
And if you were to have something ready, if you want to call another committee meeting within in a week or so, our next board meeting is August the 3rd. So what would happen is if we had something that this committee could look at and then put it on the agenda for August the 3rd, I think just that information piece would be good for our board. And our board is on board with looking at all the possibilities because they're trying to respond to our citizens that have openly and by petition and by any way they can express a concern about Crampton entrance. So we're on board with that part. It's just that we've got to the board itself. I can only be a spokesperson. I have no vote. And so we have to take it back to them, but we do need to have something to take to them to make it so they'll buy into it. I guess that's the best way to say it is it's got to be interesting enough that they know this is a win-win for the board too.
And knowing that whatever we're taking to them, we have to understand that at some point, if this wasn't happening, this development wasn't happening, we were trying to get the secondary entrance off Golfview on our own. It's going to be a cost with that as well. So we're not coming in this knowing that there's not a cost we have to actually come to this with as well. But I think the approach that they're talking about is key. Putting something together taking it through the board while we're in the process of getting this design worked out. I think that at least allows us to still push forward with the momentum that we have. Any more comments from anybody? Any concerns? No, are we comfortable right now setting a date for the next one, or do we just call it whenever you're ready?
Yeah. Only thing, just keep in mind, it's 48-hour notice.
We do have to have 48-hour notice, but just kind of, I guess we don't make an official announcement right now, but the minute you feel like you're close to chiming in, Scott, with hammering down design, I think basically get on the, we can set up a meeting with Don and DeMarco and myself pretty quickly, early next week to kind of iron out this cross-access piece. But as soon as you get to where you feel like you got something ironed down, we can go ahead and call another meeting. But we just need 48 hours notice to be able to do.
And if we didn't come back together, but there was something that was agreeable with staff, you could still put it on our agenda. My thoughts were though, if we had a committee meeting, then we would have access for all interested parties. But because it is really true where we are now, you have a week before our next meeting, which is August 3rd. But I wouldn't want to delay it any longer for your project because, we're looking at our next board meeting is the 17th. So every 2 weeks, even, that's I can see what would be an urgency for someone that's trying to move forward.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by there's flexibility in terms of the timing of getting the project approved. And there's strategic ways we can do this to maybe trim down some of the DOT. But at least what I'm looking at, I'm not looking at delaying this project a significant amount of time at all. I think you've done a noble thing by at least coming to the table, being willing to talk to us and things of that nature, and officially requesting deferral. But the key is to get this through a timeline that doesn't cause you any financial delays as well. All right, any more comments before we adjourn?
Mr. Gardner, do you have anything?
No, we're just interested to know what's going on. I certainly, as a developer ourselves, I certainly understand Glenn's concern and Scott's concern, because we're asking Scott to come up with a plan, and just like me as an attorney, he works by time is his trade. So obviously, I appreciate you guys taking that on, be willing to front some of that. And hopefully the board can come up with or agree to a reasonable cost and everything. We might be initiating that. We maybe be interested in a partnership with everyone. We want to see development. The site plan is great. I was curious myself about the 30 units and the secondary access. We've got some things that we're thinking about that we're running into that same issue. But that's the only thing. I'm just here to protect my folks' interests and kind of know what's going on. And I appreciate you putting me on the board and know what's going on. And we just look forward to working with everyone.
Anyone else? If not, I appreciate y'all being here, and we look forward to get back with you real soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me get this turned off.
Do you guys hear the actual road?